Welcome to Story Time with Chris James. I'll now pick up right where I left off last week. Pam awoke laying on the damp floor. The Greys were all looking at her as if something might be wrong. She rolled onto her back and tried to sit up. Ow! Why does my face hurt? The Greys all looked at one who was holding the wand. He looked at them and then the wand. He, or maybe it was a she. Pam wasn't too sure, since no one was wearing pink or blue things. It tried to hand the wand off to another Gray. This Gray stepped back and shook its head. As the silent argument was going on, something stuck its head out from a doorway. "Oh, there you are! We've been waiting for what seems like forever." Pam wondered why this alien looked like it was wearing overalls. Come. You wanted to speak to us about some missing human or other." The alien waved its hand towards Pam. This way, best hurry, not much time." Pam looked at the Greys as if asking for help up from her position on the floor. They all turned and marched away. Thanks for the help." She wondered if Greys understood sarcasm. She rolled back onto her stomach and pushed herself up. The front of her dress was soaked. As she got to her feet, she found she was barefoot. Not much time until what? The alien in the coveralls spoke over his or her or its shoulder. Time to go. The spaceship needed a lot to make it look sciency. There were pipes running all across the ceiling. These led to others that ran down the walls. The floor was wet from all the drips coming from loose fittings. The lighting was just enough to show where the walls were, but not what they were made of. The entire place smelled damp. The doorway was more like a gap in some of the pipes. Pam stepped through and stopped. There were several overall-clad aliens all standing around a huge valve. The valve looked as if it was left over from some industrial waterworks. Two aliens were pulling on a wrench while a third smacked it with a hammer. Two more of these creatures were standing by as if about to jump in and help. They did far more standing than jumping. One alien who was watching and not working turned to Pam and said, "So what's this about you wanting to find a missing person?" Pam finally got a good look at one of these aliens in the dim light. They all had very round heads with their eyes set on opposite sides like goldfish. Their skin was green with purple splotches. Pam had to work hard at not running away. "Yes, sir? I'm looking for a Sam Cassavetes." She felt in her non-existent pocket for the photo that she didn't have. "He vanished from his farm 4 days ago. It's well past time he was returned." Pam thought this was appropriate since most abductions only lasted a few hours. Well, except that guy out in Arizona. Just then, the alien swinging the hammer missed and nearly hit one holding the wrench. This alien ducked to avoid being brained. He came up with a mad look on his face. "Oh, yeah? Is that how you want to play?" The alien pulled the wrench loose from the bolt. He was going to use it in an inappropriate manner, but as it came off the bolt head, the bolt turned with an ear-splitting screech. This got everyone's attention, and the hostilities were forgotten. "Let's get this valve off here and replaced so we can get the warp drive going again." Pam looked at the rusted valve. "That thing controls a warp drive?" "Yes, indeed. Steam power is the best until it stopped working. Then it's just so much hot water. The alien that had been watching all the workers wiped his hands on a rag as if he had gotten them dirty through his eyes. Come with me. We'll see about this missing man thing. Oh, yes. My name is Bob. You can spell it forwards or backwards or upside down, even. He held out one hand. Pam looked at the hand. It had 6 fingers and 2 thumbs. She reached to shake hands. It felt really weird. Bob made a sound that was close to clearing his throat. All the other aliens turned and held up one hand and wiggled their fingers. Bob did the same and then turned and splashed away towards a second doorway. Pam was right behind him. She was glad the water was warm. It splashed halfway up her legs. As she followed, the air was warm but damp, so her dress didn't get any drier, but at least she wasn't cold. The next room, if you could call it that, looked like a control room for an old-fashioned submarine. There were more pipes running every which way, only now there were gauges and levers to be used to speed up or slow down something or other. There were more aliens in overalls, sitting, looking at the dials, and occasionally pushing or pulling a lever or two. Bob stopped walking and he clapped his hands together. All the aliens turned towards him, held up one hand, and did the finger wiggling thing. Bob did the same thing back at them. This was the signal for everybody to get back to work. Pam had to duck to keep from hitting her head as she walked. This got her to realize these aliens were on the short side. Not like the ones with all the hair and attitude, but shorter than her. She had to turn sideways to move past some of the seated aliens. Just a little cramped in here, isn't it? She said, just to relieve some of the tension. Uh, no. We rather enjoy this ship. It's much bigger and newer than the old one. He patted the pipe next to his head, which gave off a spurt of water in response. The alien sat down on what might have been a bed and patted the cushion next to him. Sit. Tell me what we can do for you. He made the weird facial expression that might have been a smile. Pam sat, but with plenty of room between her and this creature. She looked around, trying to get a lay of the situation. There were a few photographs mounted on the wall next to her. They showed creatures that looked like the alien next to her, but 2 of them were a bit smaller. Family, maybe? I'm looking for Sam Cassavetes. She went on to tell the entire story. The alien thought for a moment. Big guy, mustache, blonde hair. He looked at Pam with one eye. The other was busy looking around the room. Pam thought of the photo from Cassie she had somewhere back home. Yes, that's him. Thinking about back home got Pam to wondering just how far from home she was. The alien swiveled both eyes at her. Never seen him. As Pam sat there wondering what to say next, one of the aliens, sitting at one of the control stations, stood up and walked over to stand right in front of her. Bob acted as if he didn't see this. The alien standing there reached up and knocked on the bulkhead next to Pam. This got the other alien's attention. Enter! The standing alien stepped over in front of Bob and held up one hand and wiggled his fingers. Bob wiggled back. Yes? Sir, the valve has been successfully replaced. We are ready to engage the warp drive. Oh, goody! We can finally get away from this dry place. He jumped down from the seat and walked to the middle of the room. Full warp drive in 3, 2. Pam jumped to her feet. Wait, what about me? I can't go gallivanting around the universe. I have school in the morning." Bob looked at Pam as if she had just appeared out of nowhere. "Oh, yes. Call those weirdos and tell them to come get this human and take it back to where they found it." He began to pace back and forth, only taking 3 steps before having to turn. Pam thought about how she was being moved around the last few nights. "Look, isn't there an easier way to get me back home, like a shuttle or a transporter or something?" No." Bob started pacing again. After a few minutes, 4 Greys walked into the room. The place was now way too crowded. "Maybe I should move to a bigger room." Pam looked at the wand as it appeared. Her body went limp. She would have fallen to the floor if there was room to move. Instead, she just slumped over against one of the aliens driving the ship. This alien leaned forward and accidentally pushed a lever with his hand. The entire ship began to shake violently. "Warp engine is activated," came from a rusty speaker up near the ceiling. Aliens all began frantically pushing or pulling levers near them. One alien began turning a great big wheel, opening or maybe closing something. A lot of steam came out from the fittings. Pam watched as the alien she had fallen against pushed her back and onto the floor. She landed face down and felt a foot come down on her back. The alien who'd stepped on her quickly moved on. The Greys all gathered around as close as they could get, and Pam was elevated up to shoulder height. Her body began to move away from all the action and down a corridor. Pam could just see a door coming into view as she drifted along. The rusty speaker continued speaking. "Warp drive in 5, 4, 3, 2." Pam passed through the doorway and into what looked like a broom closet. The Greys stopped. The Greys dropped Pam at the foot of her bed. Her head was hanging off the end. She watched as they all turned and filed back into the closet. She wanted to just go to sleep, but the wet dress and the odd angle made this a non-starter. Pam pulled herself to her feet. The wet dress went over the back of a chair, and she moved over to the closet. The dresser was heavy, but she managed to pull it over across the door. Now for some sleep. During the night, Pam heard the door to her closet shaking a few times, followed by the sound of somebody knocking. She put her pillow over her head and ignored it. Chapter 4. Tuesday. Pam felt sluggish all day as she went from class to class. There was a pop quiz in English class. Mr. Bonnethead sprung it on them as if he was enjoying their discomfort. Pam knew she took the test, but she had no recollection of what the questions had been. No one was as surprised as her when she got a 90 on it. Mr. Bonnethead kept giving Pam suspicious looks as she sat there at her desk half asleep. "It would appear as if some of you," he looked at Pam, "have finally started studying." He didn't believe it for 1 minute. "She looks like she's still asleep," he thought. Pam opened her lunch sack and pulled out a pancake sandwich. It had a bit of sticky syrup running on the sides. Pam had just started to lick the syrup off her fingers when the sound of her phone ringing startled her. The peanut butter was everywhere. She had to search every pocket before realizing her phone was in her backpack. Bogus anomalous. No, that's not it. She looked at the screen, trying to see who was calling. "Hey, are you there?" came a tiny voice. Pam held her cell up to her ear. She could feel something squish into her ear canal. Pam switched hands to get the phone to a less syrupy ear. Miss Bogus, can you hear me?" It sounded a lot like Hilda. What made Hilda's voice different from Hildy's was the lack of sarcasm and a sense of happiness. Some guy came by looking for you, said he absolutely positively had to talk to you right away. Pam thought it was probably Agent Smith. What did he look like? He's tall, dark, handsome, in a doctorly kind of way. Then Hilda whispered, I think he might be the dentist. The thought of dentists needing to talk to her right away made Pam's teeth ache. She ran her tongue over them just to be sure nothing was rotten or loose. Do dentists make surprise visits? Did he say what he needed to talk to me about? Pam felt like she was 12 years old again. He said he would only talk to the man in charge and only in person. Hilda sounded like she was actually taking her job to heart. Had her job been as receptionist and not as a healer? Did he leave a number or is he still there? Pam hoped he wasn't hanging around like Chef Chat had. He left his card, but he said not to call, but to come by as soon as it was humanly possible. Pam was trying to remember what it was she wanted to tell Hilda to do, or rather tell Hildy to have somebody else do. She looked at the post-it note stuck to her lunch bag. It said, cheese, and that was all. Cheese? Cheese. What was it? Oh, yes, yes, the cheese, Pam said into her phone. Hilda gave Pam a look over the phone that said something about crazy or weird or something, but of course Pam couldn't see it since it wasn't that kind of phone. No, they do not have Skype or video conferencing. Go back and read the bag company on what kind of a phone there actually is at the office. Is Bill Palmerhausen in? I need him to look for something. Pam began to wonder how she was going to get him to find the cheese. Okay, once more. See, Bill Palmerhausen can only find anything as long as he can see what it is he's looking for. Hilda turned and looked at the status board. Yes, he's in. He just wrapped up a hunt for a TV remote. I need him to look for some cheese. Like a lot of cheese, like maybe a ton or two. The phone was silent for a long time, and Pam thought that Hilda might have hung up on her. Wait a sec. This isn't anything to do with Mr. Chavez and sandwiches, is it? No, there seems to be a cheese shortage going around. Around where? Hilda was beginning to worry. Pam looked at her watch. It was nearly time for her next class. I'll swing by after class, thanks, and she ran for home ec. Pam walked across the street towards her pickup. She was still wondering why it looked better each time she saw it. For an old truck, it sure was shiny. Pam had acquired the truck from her aunt after Pam's car was salvaged by a mechanic. Her 1980 Chevy Malibu had looked like a total wreck long before it had been taken apart. Since Pam had helped her Aunt Donna out with her Bigfoot hunt, even though she was unable to take any photos, Donna had drawn a picture that kind of looked like the Sasquatches that they had met. So Donna had given Pam a pickup that had been traded for a box of some unnamed kinds of pyrotechnic devices. It looked a bit beat up. There had been a crack in the windshield, and the paint was faded and scratched. There was a tear in the seat on the passenger side. Today, her pickup looked as if it had been restored by a true artist in automotives. The windshield was clear and unbroken. The paint looked showroom finish. The seats not only looked new, they were a lot different than Pam had remembered them. Leather? Her truck had old vinyl, or that's what she thought when she'd gotten it. It had begun to worry Pam when she first noticed these changes, so in her defense, Pam just stopped paying attention to them. She got behind the wheel and drove over to see the dentist. The address of the dentist's office was on the main street just down the road from the hospital. Being a big town or a small city, they only had one hospital and one shopping mall. Pam parked and got out. The parking lot was empty. Only one car was parked, and it was all the way at the far end. Pam went to see what was so vitally important. The door swung open onto a waiting room. Big, comfortable chairs were lined up, waiting for people to sit in them. A big screen TV was showing an old movie, something called The Marathon Man. A frosted window had a sign reading "Receptionist" above it. Pam knocked on the glass. The window slid open. Pam looked at the woman who looked like she should have been modeling clothes for some fashion magazine, or maybe walking around on stage showing them off. She more than filled out her uniform. "Here, fill these out, and then I'll need your insurance card and ID." The receptionist had a vacant look in her eyes. Pam held up her official bogus anomalous group ID that looked an awful lot like a police ID. Eddie had done a good job making it look official without being illegal. The receptionist looked at the ID and then at Pam. "Have a seat. The doctor will be with you in a minute." As soon as Pam sat, the door to the end of the room swung open. An older woman gave her a look over. "You're here about the things?" The woman looked around as if looking for anybody that might be eavesdropping. Without thinking, Pam looked around the empty room as well. Uh, I guess so. The woman, I guess so. The doctor wanted to see me, I think. Pam tried to smile, which usually worked. The woman scrutinized Pam's teeth and then ushered her in. Pam was led down a hall and over to a door marked Dr. Nasher's, private. The woman knocked and then stuck her head in the door. "Somebody from the bag company to see you." Pam was waved into the room. The doctor was standing behind his desk with his hand held out. As Pam walked in, his smile wavered and his hand dropped down to the desk. "I told that girl I wanted to speak to the man in charge, not another teenager." He made it sound just like an insult. Pam held her ID up and went into her best "world leader Pam" impersonation. See the bag lost in time if you missed that one. "I am Pam Bogus of the Bogus Anomalous Group. You might notice the name." She felt far less confident than she was able to act. "You said you wanted to speak to the person in charge. That would be me." She tried smiling some more. The dentist gave her teeth a quick once over. "Oh, he looked around the room as if somebody might be hiding in the corner. "Have a seat. There's a small matter I need to have looked into." As Pam was about to sit, a scream came from down the hall. It wasn't very loud, but it sure got her attention. She was about to ask the doctor, but he said, "That's the small matter I need looked into." "One of your patients?" Pam gave the doctor an inquiring look. "No, absolutely not. As of right now, there are no patients in any of the rooms. And that's why." He dropped his head into his hands. Pam pulled her notebook and pencil out. "How long have you been experiencing these sounds?" Pam took a moment to glance around the office. One wall was covered in shelves. These shelves held small pink and whitish colored items, each about 3 or 4 inches across. Pam wondered what they all might be. The doctor looked as if he wished he was working someplace else, like a hardware store or maybe the stockyard. From day one, we opened the doors last month. The waiting room was full. I started on my very first patient. Just a little root canal. Then that sound came from the end of the hallway. He gave a shudder. I tried to reassure everyone it wasn't anything I had done. He shook his head. It didn't take long for the folks waiting to all leave. The sound of a long drawn out groan came from the hallway. The doctor shuddered. This is really not good for business. Pam wrote, "Not good for business," in her notebook. Then she looked up and smiled. The doctor leaned forward and looked at her teeth. Pam quickly lost the smile. Let me take a look around. I think I might have a poltergeist or something needing relocating." "Oh, no, not like in that movie, I hope." He looked around himself in a very nervous manner. "No, no, nothing like Hollywood. In German, Polter means noisy and Geist means ghost." She was about to smile again, but thought better of it. "It's just a noisy ghost. It's not like you have a demon or anything like that." Pam thought a bit. "Unless the demon is pretending to be a ghost." The look on the doctor's face told Pam she probably shouldn't have said that. They shared an uncomfortable silence. Pam looked at the wall of shelves once more. She looked closer. They looked like teeth. "Ah, you've noticed my collection." Dr. Nasher welcomed the distraction. "I collect false teeth." He had a look of pride on his face. Wanting to look into any possible lead, Pam walked over to the wall and had a closer look. There were all manner of false teeth on display. Some were bright white, while others had kind of a yellowish look. One was brown and missing several teeth. "What?" Dr. Nasher smiled. "One of my hillbilly patients ordered those. He never came back for them, so I just put 'em in my collection." Pam spotted one set of teeth with braces on them. "Why?" "One of my patients thought those would make them look younger. Teenage teeth for a 70-year-old woman." Pam was as appalled as she was fascinated. She looked at one set that looked like it belonged to a dog or maybe a werewolf. "Who?" "Oh, those." One patient had claimed he was a werewolf. The doctor gave a short laugh. "We all know there's no such thing as werewolves, but he insisted that he needed them." A geriatric werewolf? Pam wondered if Stanley Verkolic had an older relative in town. "Okay, go back and read the preceding bag books so you'll know what in the world is going on." Pam figured it was best to have a look around the rest of the building. "I'll just have a quick look around, see if I can see anything, so we can get your ghost free as quickly as possible." She stepped out into the hallway. She looked left and then right. There were no signs of any ghosts around. To her right was the receptionist's office. To the left were several doors, each marked with a number. Pam flipped a mental coin and caught it. She was getting good at this. She went to her left. Each door opened onto a small room filled with all things dental. A huge chair that swiveled and reclined and did other much needed tasks to make tooth work easier. There was a table covered with metal torture devices used to scrape and poke into cavities. Pam thought she heard someone ask, "Is it safe?" Every wall was covered in fresh paint with pictures of people smiling. They were all smiling because they weren't currently sitting in any of these chairs. At the end of the hall drew near, Pam was running out of rooms to investigate. Still no ghosts hanging around. She opened the last door on the left and froze. There, sitting in a dental chair, was a man. He had dark hair and he was in need of a shave. The stubble on his chin was kind of patchy. His clothes were in pretty bad shape, but it looked like some kind of a white medical outfit. It was in need of a few good cleanings. He held a magazine up as he read it, looking enthralled by whatever subject was printed on the pages. Pam looked at him and said, "Howdy. I'm willing to bet you're a ghost, and—" Before she could finish, the ghost sprang from its seat and ran to the back wall. The magazine fluttered to the floor, landing at the base of the chair. As he moved along the wall, it looked like he was shrinking into the floor. By the time he reached the corner, only his head was visible as it scooted along the floor, and then he was gone. Pam ran to where he had vanished and looked at the floor. Nothing looked amiss. She got down on her knees and looked closely at the carpet. It smelled new and it felt new. She thumped it with her fist, just solid concrete under the floor covering. Getting her head right down by where the ghost had vanished, Pam took a sniff. Ugh, bad case of ghost BO. Pam thumped the floor a few times, listening for any sound of a trapdoor or hidden passage, but there was nothing. Standing back up, Pam walked back to the door. Her attention was drawn to the magazine. Stooping down, she flipped it over to see what was on the cover. Care and Feeding of the Criminally Insane. She picked it up and stuffed it into her book bag. After a long and exhausting search, Pam hadn't found any other ghosts to talk to. She finally walked back to Dr. Nasher's office. Dr. Nasher's, do you know what was here on this lot before you built your clinic? Pam had her notebook out, ready to write things down. The doctor thought for an entire second. Nothing, just a vacant lot. Pam pulled a crumpled "I need your help" form from her book bag. "If you'll just sign this form, we'll see about getting to the bottom of your haunting and try to get the poltergeist to leave." The doctor signed next to a jelly stain. "How long do you think it might take? This is really cutting into my bank account." "If we could have access to your office during the night, we can probably finish up sometime this week." Pam had her fingers crossed. "Get with Bubbles, the receptionist, and arrange for her to meet you here tonight." He looked directly at Pam without examining her teeth. "I'd feel a lot better if one of my staff were here, you know, just in case." "Oh, of course, that's our normal procedure." Normal as in from right now forward, Pam thought. Pam hopped into her pickup and started the engine. She got her cell phone out and called the office. "Bag Company, what do you want?" Hildy was back at her desk, sounding less cordial than usual. "Hildy, I need at least 3 investigators who can start a job this evening. It's a haunted dentist's office." When she ended the call, Pam realized she was going to have to be here tonight, which meant more lack of sleep on her part. Pam casually strolled into the kitchen. Paula was surprised her one and only was home so early. She looked at the clock above the stove and then the calendar. On the calendar were check marks showing each day that Pam had been home any time before dark. There were 6 for the entire year. Well, actually, that included part of last year as well. "Pamela, you're home, and the sun is still up." Pam tried to come up with an excuse as to why she was going to have to go out after dinner. Uh, it's just that, you know, you have to go out on business after dinner, right?" Paula gave Pam a motherly look. See, it's this haunted office. I tried to get someone." Pam stammered worse than usual. "No one except Barbara, Barbara, what the heck is Barbara's last name again? Oh, yes, I remember Barbara. What was her last name? I seem to have forgotten. She used to come by all the time selling Girl Scout cookies. She was a bit rough. Threatened to burn down the neighbor's house because they didn't want to buy any cookies. Paula began to wonder if this was the kind of person her kid should be hanging around with. The dentist is going broke because his office is haunted, and I said, yes, yes, you can go. Just don't bring anything home with you, as in ghosts or things. Paula had met Sharma, sort of, at the New Year's party. She didn't know this was the same person who had spent several nights in their home back in July, just before the blizzard. Sharma hadn't so much haunted the house as cleaned it. Ah, and try to be home by 11. It's a school night. Pam's phone rang. It was Sarah. After promising to A, not bring any spirits home, and B, be home by 11-ish, and C, not to talk to any strangers, although any ghosts would be strangers up until Pam was able to introduce herself and get to know them, and D, have a good time, and also E, say hello to Barbara for her. Now, Pam was finally out the door and heading to the dentist's office. Pam stopped just down the block and waited. Sarah came running out the door carrying a huge backpack. She rounded the front end of the pickup and piled into the passenger seat. I'm ready. Let's go. I brought everything I thought we might need. Sarah stopped to catch her breath. Pam was wondering, how did you know I was going on a ghost hunt tonight? I didn't. I just had an urge to call you, and when you answered the phone, it popped into my head, wouldn't it be cool if you were going on a ghost hunt? So I asked. Sarah got quiet for a second. Does this mean I'm becoming psychic or something? Maybe. We'll have to wait and see how your abilities develop, Pam said. They pulled into the dentist's clinic and parked. Barbara's vehicle was already there. The ghost hunter was pacing back and forth, anxious to get started. Even though she hung around Pam all the time and she knew about Sharma and Dan and the Civil War soldiers, Barbara wanted to get her own evidence that ghosts were real. She had on her latest official ghost hunting vest, which had over 87 pockets in all sizes, ready to hold all of her ghost hunting equipment. Barbara walked over to Pam. Look at this new device I bought. It's guaranteed to find ghosts. She held up a plastic wrapped box with an impressive image on the front. I just got it in the mail and I haven't had a chance to open it yet. She peeled off the plastic and popped the box open. It says insert 5 B cell batteries? Pam looked at Barbara. Did you say B cell? Barbara looked closely at the battery compartment. Yes, it says 5 B cell batteries. Sarah made an overly dramatic effort to look in all of her pockets for any B cells that might have somehow found their way into her wardrobe. Barbara dropped the gadget back in the trunk of her car. That explains why it only cost $5. The shipping was 12. Pam looked around for the staff member who was supposed to keep an eye on them while they looked to encourage the spirits to move on to a new location. After what felt like an hour but was actually only 15 minutes, a tiny car came puttering into the parking lot. It was Bubbles finally catching up with them. Bubbles got out and looked at the 2.5 investigators as if they were ruining her evening. She started walking to the door to the clinic, but then she had to go back to her car and shut it off. On her second trip to unlock the door, she was forced to return to her vehicle to get the keys. Pam and Barbara were waiting as patiently as patients. Sarah was busy clicking pictures of the outside of the building. Bubbles unlocked the door and held it open. As the 2.5 investigators walked in, she said, "I hope this isn't going to take all night." Bubbles then went over to her office, sat down, and began texting her girlfriends. Barbara was about to say something to the receptionist, but Pam just shook her head and led her team to the back hallway. "This is where I saw the ghost. He looked in bad shape, but he was fast." She pulled a magazine from her book bag. "He was reading this." Barbara thumbed through the magazine, but didn't pay it much attention. Sarah had to stop and look at all the pictures. "Why is this guy locked in a bathtub?" She held up the page so that the others could see it. Pam took care to only look with one eye in case she saw something she wasn't prepared for. That which has been seen cannot be unseen. Barbara looked at the page. "Oh, back in the old time, when somebody was crazy, they did things like that." She did that thinking hard look. "In the early 1900s, doctors thought a good long soak in a hot bath would help cure what ails folks. Sometimes it was a long, bad cold bath as well." She looked at the odd looks she was getting from her two friends. "What? We studied this in Girl Scout camp." "Ick," both Pam and Sarah said. Barbara took out one of her many electric devices and began looking for signals of ghostly activity. Pam just looked around for anybody who looked like they were dead. Sarah had a thermal camera and was walking back and forth, holding it out in front of her. "There's something weird going on the other side of this door," Barbara whispered. She was standing at a door right next to the door where Pam had had her encounter. Pam and Sarah moved over and stood to one side. Barbara looked over at Pam and nodded her head. Pam smiled back. Barbara aimed her chin at the doorknob. "Oh, oops." Pam turned the knob and slowly swung the door inwards. The room was empty. Well, empty except for a pile of Halloween decorations. Must be the storage room. They moved to the next exam room. Barbara walked from one wall to the next, holding her device out. She swept back and forth along each wall. As she was coming close to the far corner, she began to lower the device towards the floor. "There's something here, but I don't know what." That's right where the ghost had vanished. Barbara took a second and then a third weird looking device out. They each had dials and knobs all along the fronts. Squatting on the floor, she set one down right where Pam had seen the ghost vanish. She then moved the other device back and forth. "I think there might be a portal or a doorway to another dimension." Barbara stood back up. Pam took a step back, not wanting anything to do with other dimensions again. Barbara pulled a small mirror from one of her pockets. She laid it down on the floor with the mirrored side down. She got her eye right up close to the back side and began looking. Pam thought this looked very strange indeed. "What are you doing?" "Remember when me and you went into the land of the mirrors?" Barbara said without looking up. "How can I forget? I'm never going to do anything that stupid ever again," Pam hoped. "I got the idea from looking through all those mirrors. I had the back removed from this mirror so I can look through it." "How does it work?" Pam was impressed by Barbara's innovation. "Not at all." Barbara moved back so Pam could have a look. Pam got right down close to the mirror, and she looked through it and saw the carpet on the other side. Well, it was a good idea, if only it had worked. As the three were trying to come up with their next course of action, the door swung open. They all turned to look, hoping the ghost was about to make his presence known. There in the doorway was Bubbles. Hey, would you guys quit making all that noise? I'm trying to have a conversation with my BFFs. She gave each of them a look. We're not making any noise. Sarah went on the offensive right away. Maybe you're hearing noises inside your head. This last statement was so quiet that only Pam heard her. With the door open, the three investigators could hear a whole party of sound coming from the clinic. Someone was screaming as if in pain. Another voice was laughing as if enjoying the discomfort of their companion. An off key woman was singing in a very loud voice. This sounded like an argument between the set of bagpipes and an accordion. A man's voice kept yelling for somebody to stop making all that noise. How long has this been going on? Pam asked. Since just after you kids arrived. Bubbles looked from one to the other. Wait a minute. If none of y'all are making that noise, then we got ghosts, Barbara declared, looking at one of her many electronic devices. She ran out to the hallway to try for a photo or two. Sarah was right behind her, holding a thermal camera in front of her face. She nearly collided with the receptionist, who was frozen in place. Pam was halfway out the door when Bubbles looked over her shoulder. Pam's shoulder, not hers. Nobody said nothing about no ghosts, she declared. Pam had to stop and decipher this triple negative. What did you think all that screaming and moaning was? I thought the doc was just lousy. Bubbles looked around the room for a quick exit. Ghosts, as in dead people? Pam just nodded her head. You mean I work in a haunted dentist's office? Pam nodded again. With an ear-splitting scream, the receptionist took off running. She went down the hall and past her office. The front door slammed shut as the receptionist exited the building. Pam listened as the scream slowly grew less audible. Soon it was gone. The three investigators moved about the office. Barbara now had her electronic device in each hand and a camera hung around her neck. Sarah was swinging the thermal camera around as if it were a weapon. Pam just walked along looking for anyone who looked out of place. Barbara walked along the hallway. She would stop now and again and move her ghost hunting electronics from side to side and then continue walking. As she was getting closer to the end of the hall, she stopped. The gadget in her hand was making a soft beeping sound. What does that mean? Sarah asked in enthralled voice. I don't know. It's never done this before. Barbara thumped the gadget on the side with her hand. It kept beeping. Maybe there's something on the other side of that door. Sarah got her camera ready. Barbara stuffed her handheld devices into various pockets and then got her camera up and ready as well. They both stood there waiting. Pam looked from one to the other and back. Guess you want me to open the door, huh? She hoped there wasn't anything too weird on the other side. Pam turned the knob and pushed. The door swung in on what looked like the staff's lounge. Barbara and Sarah both froze. The room was full of people. Well, ghosts. There was a rather disheveled looking ghost that was wearing a canvas jacket with really long sleeves that were attached in the front. One ghost was in a dressing gown. There were toys sticking from all of his pockets. A female looking ghost was dressed up to look like she lived in the 1500s. She had a tinfoil crown on her head. A few ghosts looked as if they were having a hard time staying in focus. They were mostly translucent. Pam thought the guy in white looked familiar. The female with the crown looked at Pam. It's the living! Run! She yelled. Pam was standing between Sarah and Barbara. The ghosts all ran in all directions, which didn't accomplish anything. The room was only 10 foot by 10 foot. The ghosts ran to the corner, but then turned towards the door. Uh-oh! Pam was about to jump to the side, but it was too late. The ghosts all came piling out the door at one time. Pam felt something go right through her body. It felt icky. Sarah let out a squeal and fell to the floor. One of the ghosts stepped down on her. Its foot went right through her stomach. Barbara managed to stumble back against the opposite wall, but the ghost in white wound up standing in the same spot. It looked as if Barbara had two heads for a second there. Screaming and shouting, the ghosts all ran for the last door on the left. The woman, dressed like she was the queen or something, stopped and opened the door. Then, as one, the ghosts all ran inside the room. The queen looked at Pam and gave her a hand gesture and then through the opening and slammed the door. The three women, well, the two women and one girl, the one woman, one girl, and one tween, all stood there staring at the end of the hallway. Okay, Pam and Barbara stood there, and Sarah looked up from the floor. "What?" Barbara asked anyone with an answer. "Was that a bunch of ghosts?" Sarah asked, trying to get back to her feet. Pam helped her minion back to the standing position. "Yep. Congratulations. Y'all have seen your ghosts." Barbara looked at the closed door and then at her camera. "I didn't get any pictures." She sniffed very loudly. Sarah looked over at the ghost hunter. "I think I might have gotten them." She held up the thermal camera and showed it was still running. After checking in the last room on the left and finding the ghosts had all vanished, they decided it was well past time to get out of there. As Barbara was about to pull out of the parking lot, they all heard a scream coming from around the corner. The scream was getting louder. Bubbles came screaming around the corner. She screamed as she opened the door to her car and got in. She was still screaming as she pulled out of the parking lot and sped away. Sarah looked after the receptionist. "Boy, you'd think she saw a ghost or something." Pam dropped Sarah off at her home and then drove the three houses to her place. She parked at the curb and went inside. Paula came from the kitchen at the sound of the front door closing. "Pam, you're home, and it's only 9:15. Did something happen?" Paula began to worry about why her child was home so early. "No, nothing much. We did find out what's haunting the place, but we don't know why yet." Pam found it was too much effort to think. "I'm going to go to bed. Try to get a jump on tomorrow." Paula was speechless. The banging on the closet door brought Pam out of her dreams. She looked across the room to her dresser that was keeping the door shut. It sounded as if the Greys were trying to break the door down. "Look, unless you're bringing Sam Cassavetes back, stop bothering me," Pam said to the door. The banging stopped for a bit, but then the door shook harder. Al woke from a dream. "Did we leave the cat outside?" Paula mumbled without opening her eyes. "We don't have a cat." "Oh, okay." Al laid back down. He tried to think what had woke him, but his mind was a jumble. "The dog?" We don't have a dog either," Paula mumbled from under her pillow. Pam tried to ignore the sound coming from her closet. She did her best to not notice the scraping sound like a small piece of metal being drug across something else. She put her pillow over her head, but her curiosity kept asking what that sound was. Sitting up in bed, she tried to see the door. It was white, so the moon kind of made it glow. She listened harder. It was definitely something being forced. Pam slid out of bed and stepped closer to the door. She looked at the knob, but it wasn't moving. She looked around the edges of the door and didn't see what was making the sound. Then the movement caught her attention. The pin in the top of the hinge was rising up as if it was being pulled by a magnet or something. It rose up out from its position and fell to the floor. As the pin fell away, the hinge dropped out of its position and the door came forward and bumped up against the back of her dresser. Pam didn't know what to do as the door began to shift to the side. It was being pushed by the Greys in the closet. Oh, no, not tonight. Look, I'm exhausted. I haven't had more than a few minutes' sleep since you guys started showing up. Pam had only moved the dresser far enough to hold the door shut, but the Greys simply stepped around the edge and into the room. Pam turned to run for the door, but she was stopped when the wand was waved. She found herself being transported into the closet. The Greys had to lift her up and over the top of the dresser. Pam tried to grab the top as she went by, but her hands were not responding to her need to not go with these gray creatures. I wish I hadn't answered that phone call, she said inside her head. Pam was set down gently on the floor. She found her hands were hers to command once more. Rolling over, she pushed herself into a sitting position. The room was dark. She could feel some kind of a vibration through the part of her making contact with the floor. She caught movement in the dark. There was someone there, or maybe several someones. The room sprang into view when somebody turned on a light. Pam was surprised to find herself staring at three Sasquatch. They looked a lot like Dupe, maybe distant cousins. She thought of it a bit odd that Bigfoot would be occupying a spaceship. Pam got to her feet. Oh, hey guys, I didn't expect to run into you guys again. The three Sasquatch all just stood there staring at her. Finally, one held up what looked like an old flip phone and flipped it. The voice sounded garbled as he, she, it talked into the device. After a few minutes, a door opened and a hairy creature walked in. It grumbled to the three and then it turned to Pam. You are not talking the words of the Malapasa. I am talking the words of your planet. You wish to have words with our folks about a misplaced thing of yours. Pam had to run this through her brain and try to translate it into English. Oh, you're the translator. I get it. That's weird because I could talk to Dupe and his family. I guess you're from a different tribe, huh? The translator turned to the others and made a grumbling sound. One of the three made what sounded like angry grunts. He, she, or it, kept pointing one huge finger in Pam's direction. The translator turned back to Pam. We are not knowing this Dupe thing. Our folks come to this world planet only last month, not to be talking language yet. It's just that y'all look like some people I know. Pam thought it best to change the subject. I'm looking for Sam Cassavetes. She went on with the whole story. The translator began speaking to the three. He went on a lot longer than Pam thought necessary. Then an animated discussion, or maybe an argument, broke out. It looked as if all these Sasquatch look-alikes were talking at once. Several of them were staring at Pam. Pam began to feel somewhat underdressed in her pajamas. I'm going to start sleeping fully dressed, she mumbled. The translator looked back at Pam. This is no good. We are not knowing any human from 5 or even 7 days before. One of the Sasquatch look-alikes made some grunting sounds. The translator said, It is best for us to consume you first. Pam felt her knees go weak. Eat me? Yes, come. We all consume massive quantities, and you will be joining us. The translator pointed towards the door. Pam hoped and prayed that she wasn't on the menu. The translator led Pam down a corridor. The others fell in behind. Pam felt very small since everyone was towering over her. They walked into a room that might have been a stage set for a medieval movie. The only thing missing were a bunch of knights. There were banners hanging down from the ceiling, and the walls were covered with tapestries, all showing scenes of Sasquatch looking things eating things. Pam couldn't tell what they were eating, and she didn't really want to know. There was a huge table with benches on each of the four sides. Here you are sitting on this place. You first. The translator pointed to one of the benches. Pam had to throw one leg up onto the bench and then pull the rest of her up onto the what looked like a wooden table or bench, but it felt more like plastic. When she got situated, the tabletop was level with her chin. There in front of her was a wooden bucket. It looked to be a gallon or so in capacity. It had a handle like a coffee cup. Mr. Armstrong used one about this size. Looking around the room, Pam saw there was one of these containers sitting at each place. Tipping hers forward, Pam saw it was empty. The Sasquatch lookalikes all sat down and they looked at Pam. Pam looked back with a question on her face. She was about to say something when a door banged open and two of these hairy aliens came walking in carrying a giant wooden tub. Dark fluid sloshed over the top of the lip. One of the creatures carrying the tub lifted out a ladle and dumped its contents into the bucket in front of Pam. They went to the next and then the next until all the buckets were full and the tub was empty. The two set the tub down and then sat at the table. Pam looked around the table. All eyes were on her. The translator finally said, "You first," and pointed at her bucket. Pam pulled the now full container over to the edge of the table and looked in. There was some kind of a dark brown liquid in it that looked an awful lot like coffee. She took a sniff. Coffee? She looked at the creatures, all looking at her. "You first," said one of them, mimicking what the translator had said. Pam had to leave the bucket sitting on the table, but was able to tip it towards her lips. She took a tiny sip. It was coffee. Nothing like what Mr. Techno made, but still it was drinkable. She got a mouthful down her throat and a lot more down her front. It was a good thing the coffee was only hot and not boiling. Her lap was soaked. As soon as she had started, all the creatures hoisted their drinks up and began gulping it down. They let out all manners of enjoyment sounds. A few slapped each other on the back. One tried this with Pam and nearly knocked her onto the tabletop. The aliens straight across from Pam made a lot of grunting and growling sounds. The translator said, "Our big and wonderful leader says he is wanting to know why you inquired into our presence." Pam could feel the coffee coursing through her body. "Yes, I wanted to know if y'all have any idea as to where Sam Cassavetes might be. I was asked by his wife to track him down." She took another sip just to be polite. The creature across from Pam began to grunt and groan some more. After a long oration, the translator said, "You are the very first critter of your kind allowed in our ship. We do not take kindly to the hairless things crawling about your world." He did what Pam hoped was smile. "I guess I should get going then. If you think of anybody that does know where the missing farmer is, could you have them just send me a message? I'm getting tired of being up all night." The translator answered, "We will be happy." Happy? Yes, to tell everyone to come see you about this missing human thingy. He waved one hand towards the door. "No, wait! I just want them to send me a message." Pam saw the Greys coming. "Really, it would be best if they—" She felt her body go limp. And with that, I am done for this exciting episode of the Bag Company. Uh, sorry about that. UFOs attack the Bag Company. Till next week, this is Chris James for Story Time. I hope you're enjoying it so far.